Good morning, Greatons. Welcome back again to our session 2 of our business studies. Basically, we're still looking at forms of ownership. Part 2. Yesterday, we looked at the concept when it comes to your forms of ownership. Welcome. My name is Hector X Nkosi. I'll be taking you for business studies for the rest of the year. I hope everyone is well, everyone is fine, and I hope everyone is recapping from yesterday, basically. Welcome to those who have just joined us today. Welcome to our fun class of business studies, basically, boys and girls. Okay, now let's look at these few things, right? Yesterday, we looked at the form of ownerships, and you need to know these learning outcomes, meaning that by the end of this lesson, boys and girls, you need to be able how to do these things. So learning outcomes are the things that you need to know by the end of this chapter, basically. So please make sure that you familiarize yourself with these learning outcomes and you know what is required from you after this chapter. I did explain these learning outcomes into detail yesterday, but for those who have just joined us, I'm just going to highlight them again. So you must outline or name the factors that must be considered when choosing a form of ownership. You must explain the difference between profit and non-profit organization or companies. You must also outline the forms of ownerships and classify them into profit and non-profit organization, basically. You must define the meaning of different forms of ownership. You must also explain or describe the characteristics, advantages or disadvantages of each form of ownership. You must distinguish, tabulate, differentiate, or compare different forms of ownership, basically. You must also be able to identify forms of ownership from a given case studies or scenarios, cartoons, pictures, right? You must also be able to outline the different types of cooperatives. You must be able to explain, discuss, describe the advantage and disadvantage of cooperatives. And you must also be able to select the best form of ownership and justify the reasons for your selection, basically. Okay, this was just a recap from yesterday. Now, let's start with our today's work. Today, basically, boys and girls, we'll be looking at the factors that affects your forms of ownership. We'll be looking at your profit companies, your non-profit companies, and how do you classify a form of ownership in terms of this profit and non-profit companies, basically. All right, now let's look at the factors. Now, factors to be considered when choosing a form of ownership. Basically, here, boys and girls, you need to know the size and the nature of the business. So basically, these are the things that you need to take into account when you are considering any form of ownership or when you want to join any form of the ownership. So the size and the nature of the business, so how big it is and what is the nature of the business. Do you want to sell goods or do you want to render a service? That's the nature of the business, basically, right? The size, how big it is, who will it accommodate and stuff like that, right? You also need to look at the way in which the business is controlled and managed or management, right? So you must look at the management. So you must draw a plan, that, okay, I'm planning to have 3 supervisors and how many employees and stuff like that. So you must have the planning about your management. So also you must look at that who bears the risk or risk bearing. So basically, what risk are you going to face basically when you form this ownership basically, or who will be bearing the risk? So you must look at it in a perspective of a consumer and the seller basically, so that you can see that, okay, the consumers will face a risk and stuff like that. Then now, how capital is going to be raised. So you need to know where are you going to get your cash. Does it make sense? So now, form of capital, basically, we know capital is the money or any monetary thing that we start a business with. Remember your capital, I mean to say, it can be in the form of tangible assets, or whatsoever, basically, right? So you must also understand the capital, that how you're going to raise it. Are you going to issue out shares if you're a company? If you're just a standalone, like a sole proprietor, are you going to go to the bank and borrow money, your loan? So you need to know how you're going to raise your capital. Also, how profits and losses will be dealt with, or sharing of profits, right? So we need to know or discuss that. Let's say it's three of us that are forming this form of ownership. So we need to discuss on how are we going to share our profits or losses, basically. Is it based on what we have invested or contributed in the business, or it is based on certain things? So we need to discuss that. Who is responsible for any debts made by the business or liability? So we need to know whether it's the business that is responsible for debts, or is it us as owners that will be responsible for debts, basically, right? Your tax implications for the profits earned by the business. You must know your tax implications, meaning now here you must comply with SARS. You must make sure that you submit each year your tax returns and stuff. The lifespan of the business, or the continuity, meaning the going concern. So looking in the next 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years, where do you see your business? What is the lifespan? Is the business seasonal, or the business is for the rest of your life? The business is infinity, or some of the business we know we do them just for seasonal things. We know sometimes when people, they do seasonal business, like for example, where there's a certain thing that happens once a year, and people are going to open a business during that thing. Like, for example, now we are facing corona, but let's say the corona, it's something that might end anytime soon, or it can end maybe in the next 3 years once they've gotten the vaccine. But now, can you agree with me now? The people who started the mask businesses, uh, so the business for mask, basically, it was for corona. But should the corona end, can you see the lifespan of the business? It won't continue anymore, because people, they're just going to buy mask for other things, not for corona. But now the business for mask is booming, because everyone is needing the mask so that they can help themselves to cover their mouth and stuff, right? Also, let's look at the vulnerability of the business in terms of lawsuit or legal person. So how vulnerable it is, your business, in terms of your lawsuit and your legal person, if someone wants to open a case for you and stuff like that, basically. Okay, so these are the factors that you need to take into consideration when you form any form of ownership, basically. So remember, we've got so many forms of ownership. Examples can be a sole proprietor, it can be companies, it can be a partnership, it can be a closed corporation. So before you form any business or any form of ownership, you must look at these things, guys. So these are the factors that you must look at. So now, if I can say, list 5 or 3 factors to be considered when choosing a form of ownership, you must be able to know the following. Sorry about that. You must be able to know the following line items. Basically, this thing is going to help you a lot, because now, come exam time, you know that you won't be confused. You would know your stuff and stuff like that, right? So please, guys, familiarize yourself with these things and make sure that you know these things. And look, you do not have to cram them. Does it make sense? You do not have to cram them. The only thing that you need to do, guys, once you understand what things they need to be considered when choosing a form of ownership, basically, you'll be able to answer any question in an exam or your assessment, basically. So, guys, please bear in mind about these things. All right. Now, I want us to look at the difference between your profit and non-profit companies, right? Remember, we said to you, the profit are the ones that are making money in return. Basically, your profit-making companies, they are there to make money. I know some of you yesterday, you were actually giving me the answers, because I said to you, give me profit companies, an example of profit companies and example of non-profit companies. And someone typed on our chat box They typed KFC. They also typed, I think it was KFC and something else. I can't recall. So profit companies, guys, are those companies that are in a scheme of making a profit. Basically, they want to sell something or render a service to someone in order to gain a profit. But we do also find other companies that their intention is not to make a profit, but maybe to help the nation, So we call those NPC, right? Your non-profit companies, basically your NPC. Those are your non-profit companies. They are not making any profit. They're just helping out. It might be in a reason of giving back to the community or for any other reasons. So those companies, they just accumulate money through donations or whatever, then so that they can go help uh, the needy people, basically, right? So with your profit companies, basically, here the company is established for only one aim, and that is to make profit. So here, there's only one aim that we as company have to do is to make profit, is to make money now and then. We must have sales so that we can make money now and then. Whereas in your NPC, your non-profit companies, the aim is not to make profit, right? But is to help, right? So a company incorporated for financial gain for its shareholders, for it's one of those companies that it's incorporated for financial gain for its shareholders. But remember, guys, now that in a company, we sell shares basically, right? So we sell shares, and the people who are holding those shares, we call them shareholders basically, right? So you need to know that, okay, under this one, we incorporate for financial gain for who? For our shareholders. Remember, our shareholders are the ones that are invested in the business. So in the return, they must get what? They must get a gain, financial gain. Then remember yesterday, we also touched on Memorandum of Incorporation. Your MOI sets out who the directors and shareholders are as well as their rights, duties, and responsibilities, right? So your profit-making company, boys and girls, you must have your MOI, right? All those companies must have their MOI, basically, right? So this document basically you'll get in your profit-making companies, your MOI. Remember, we said MOI, guys. We even made an example yesterday about what? About the code of conduct. I said to you, at a school level, we also have our MOI, even though we don't call it MOI, but sometimes at our school level, we call it a code of conduct. Basically, that's where we get rights. Sorry, I'm still looking for my cursor. That's where we get rights, duties, and responsibilities, basically, guys. So we know that the code of conduct tells us that each learner at school has a right to do what, has a right to do that. And each learner is responsible to do that, and do that, right? So basically, we do have MOIs, just that under companies, there are sets of rules that are being written under Memorandum of Incorporation. Well, everywhere where you go, guys, whether it's a business organization or whatever, they do have their sets of rules, rights, duties, and responsibilities. Does it make sense? So even us as teachers, we do have rights, we do have duties and responsibilities to our learners. It's just that we don't call it MOI. It's just that profit-making companies, they call all these sets of rights, duties, and responsibilities in one thing as your Memorandum of Incorporation. So you as a learner or you as a school kid, your MOI, it's actually what? It's actually your code of conduct, because that's where you get your rights, your duties, and your responsibilities, basically. Right. Now, let's look at the last bullet. Last bullet, it also set out the number of shares that the company is authorized to issue, basically. So it has your authorized share or authorized shares. Now, let me touch on the number of shares. So basically, what they are saying, the MOI basically tells you also what number of shares does the company needs to issue to the public, basically, right? The word authorized comes from the word author, meaning this is the maximum of shares that the company can issue to the public, right? So remember, how do we make profits? under companies, right? We make profits under companies by issuing out shares, right? We know shares are your sort of like, you can't see or touch shares, right? It's just an intangible thing. Does it make sense? So we must issue out, I mean, the MOI also sets out the number of shares that the company is authorized to issue. So basically, if my authorized shares are 6 million, meaning I can't issue more than 6 million. I can only issue at the maximum of 6 million. Anything above 6 million, therefore, it won't be regarded as what I've authorized, basically. So your MOI also has your authorized shares of capital. Right. Now, we are still looking at a difference between profit and non-profit companies, right? Now, I want us to look at our NPC, our non-profit making companies, right? So the company is established for charity purposes or to promote social and cultural activities. That's what I said earlier on to you guys, that actually for your NPC, the aim is to not make profit, but is to gather funds from different donors, from different donators, in order for us to help for charity, in order for us to help for social and cultural activities. This is the month of July. We know that on the 18th, it's the Mandela Day, basically. That's where you'll see most of the NPC. That's where you'll see most of your non-profit making companies coming in. When majority of them are doing your 67 minutes, that's where you'll see majority of your NPC. Some of the companies, even profit-making companies, they do make the 67 minutes, but there are those companies that are solely for helping the nation for charity purposes. And your NPC companies, your non-profit making companies, are those companies that you see on the 1st of December when we celebrate the World AIDS Day. Are those companies where when you see on your 16th June when you celebrate the Youth Day, those companies that you see when we celebrate our Heritage Day on the 9th of August, donating or promoting social and cultural activities, are those companies that you see when it's the Christmas Day, everyone when is celebrating Christmas with their families, those companies that are there to donate to the needy people groceries and food hampers. Are those companies that you see when we're facing our Mandela Day, basically, guys? You're going to get them September 24th during our Heritage Day. Those companies are always there to help out the nation, you know, to make the nation to unite and not everyone to fill a gap of any things that they need in their lives. So those companies, your NPC, are those companies that are helping you, basically, guys, or are helping the nation to promote social and cultural activities. So for charity purposes, basically. So by now, you know the difference between your profit-making company and your non-profit making company. Right. Now, the second bullet here is a non-profit company, is an association incorporated not for gain. So basically here, we're not here to make any money, but is to help to promote social and cultural activity, right? So remember, even the NPC has its MOI. So it says the Memorandum of Incorporation defines the purpose and its operations, basically, right? So whether it's a profit-making company or non-profit-making company, as long as it's a company, it must have its MOI. Then we also look at the company. So the company have an independent legal entity, but the board of trustee is protected unless found negligent or fraudulent. So basically, guys, it says here, the company have an independent legal entity. Basically here, the company, it is an independent legal entity, but the board of trustee is protected unless the negligent or fraudulent. So the board of trustees, they are protected unless they do the negligency and they did some fraud. Therefore, they won't be protected in that case. So the negligence and fraud overrides these trustees, basically, right? All right. I hope everything is well so far. Everyone is following. Um, let's look at the next slide. Now, we need to look at our forms of ownership, basically, boys and girls. We know under forms of ownerships, guys, these are what we get, basically. We get a sole trader, or we can call it a sole proprietor. We know that a sole trader, guys, it's when you are solely alone selling your goods or rendering a service, but solely alone, you are alone. Remember, the word sole trader comes from the word solo. Solo means one person, basically. So here it's when one person operates the business, they own and operate that business, basically. That business is being regarded as a sole trader or a sole proprietor. Then we also have a partnership, right? So sometimes, guys, you can form a business in terms of a partnership. So meaning now a partnership, remember, it's more than two, not it's more than two, but not more than 18 people. So you can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up until to 18. You can't reach 18. Therefore, you can form a partnership, right? So sure you've seen some of the billboards or the boards at the stores say maybe Billy and James Partners, that business is a partnership. Sometimes you see some of the consultants firms when they say maybe a T&G Partners, which means that that's a partnership business. Remember, guys, a business, it can be a trade business or a service business, right? So a trade business is when you're selling goods and services. Then a service business, a trade business, it's when you sell just goods, where you just selling tangible things only. Then a service business is when you render a service, like having a consulting company, um, maybe opening a dentist, being a lawyer, rendering a service. A school also, it's a service company basically because they are rendering a service to you guys, and then in return you guys will pay school fees. Does it make sense? So businesses are divided into two, basically, boys and girls. Then you also have your close corporations. Basically, I don't want to touch a lot on close corporations because are no longer there or they are no longer existing, basically. So I don't want to touch a lot about close corporations. But if you want to read about them, your CCs, you can always go to wherever you can read about them, but they are no longer important, your CCs. Then let's look at your personal liability companies, your PLCs. Now, with your PLCs, guys, you'll see when you get into personal liability companies, which I'm still going to touch on those, right? Then also with your private companies, I'm still going to touch on that. But how do you see your private companies? I'm sure you've seen this, guys, your PTY Ltd. This means private companies, right? So LTD stands for limited, PTY stands for private. So PTY limited, does it make sense? So those are your private companies. If you see a board outside, when you are passing, that company says maybe James PTY Limited, which means that company is a private company. But if it just says James Limited, it's just a public company. Does it make sense? Because of LTD only. But as soon as it has PTY, it means that it's a private company. Then you also get your state-owned companies, your SOCs. They're very important also. I'm still going to break down that also. You must also look at your non-profit company, your NPOs, basically. Your NPOs are very important. Those companies, we've just explained them in the previous slides. Then you also have your cooperatives, right? All right, boys and girls. Next slide. Okay, now let's look at the classification now. The classification of forms of ownerships according to the profit and non-profit companies. Now you need to classify between profit and non-profit companies. So we took all those forms of ownerships. So basically these forms of ownerships, these ones, we took all the companies. So how many companies do we have? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you've got 5 different companies. Now we need to classify these 5 different companies on whether is it profit or non-profit, right? Which ones are non-profits, which ones are profit. So according to these 5, let's see which ones are profit and which ones are not profit. So your private company, obviously, guys, is to be reflected as a proprietary limited or PTY Ltd basically, and is being regarded as your profit company. Your personal liabilities companies is to be reflected as an incorporation, right? I'm sure you have seen James Company and INC, meaning it's being incorporated. Therefore, it's part of your profit-making companies, right? Your public companies should be reflected as limited or LTD, basically. Even your state-owned companies, boys and girls, to be reflected as SOCs that are being regarded as your profit companies, basically. So it's very important, boys and girls, to know whether is it a profit company or a non-profit company. So we know out of all these 5 different companies that we get under forms of ownerships, we know that 4 of them are actually profit-making company, and 1 of them is your non-profit making company, like your NPC. It says itself, NPC companies to be reflected as NPC, like your non-profit companies to be reflected as NPC, and we know it says non-profit companies. So this one, it's pretty much straightforward. It tells you basically that this is just solely your non-profit company. So guys, I hope everything it makes sense so far, and I hope you are following from my side. I hope I explained your different companies basically according to what you were looking for. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys so much. You guys are so amazing. If you have any questions, guys, please feel free to email me at nkosihector28@gmail.com. I'm always here, guys, to help you with your questions. You can send through your questions any time of the day. I'm always available. I'll try by all means to send the questions maybe at least. I always try by all means to check my emails at least every after 2 hours. So please feel free, guys, and please study hard. You know what? 2020, it's almost over. You can do this, guys. And please, 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 practice makes perfect. Do lots and lots of readings, guys. You know, the way business studies is so interesting, guys. It's that also you can relate it to anything that is happening currently in the world. You'll see actually when we cover other topics that actually the things that we'll be doing in business studies are the things that are happening in our real life scenarios or situations. So boys and girls, that's for me for today. Until we meet again tomorrow, same time. From my side, I say have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.